Let me also join Madam Toko to express my gratitude at meeting all of you, particularly some of the people that I already know, but a lot more that I haven't met in the past. And I also want to acknowledge Mr. Diop for his leadership and also for inviting us as UN Women to be part and parcel of this process of looking at the ECA's work on gender and how we can also collaborate and partner with the ECA. First and foremost, I think as Mr. Diop has said, the role of the Committee on Women and Development to advise the ECA on its work on gender equality and women's empowerment is critical. It is critical, particularly in this time of the development agenda of Africa, but also of the world. We all know, and I think this is what you will be discussing throughout the next 3 days, that Africa is developing its Agenda 2063, its 50-year development agenda, while at the same time the whole globe is looking at our progress in achieving the Millennium Development Goals, and therefore coming up with a strategy for how do we move as a whole world around the post-2015 development era. Therefore, the constitution of this meeting at this very time is very critical. And you in this room are going to help us to ensure that these processes are going to put gender equality and the empowerment of women at the center of the development agenda, not only for Africa, but for the whole world. I'm sure you will be later on in the program be discussing the processes that have been evolving, but also reviewing those processes from a perspective of, have these processes been indeed inclusive? Have these processes been indeed taking on the voices and concerns of women, girls, boys, and girls around Africa? Have they been engaging you as individuals working in national gender machineries across Africa? And if they have not, what is it we can do to change the process from today onwards? I think that is very critical as we go through this meeting today. But allow me to share with all of you some reflection on a meeting I attended over the weekend, which was organized by Femnet. It was a civil society meeting, which was also doing exactly what we are doing here, looking at the post-2015 development agenda, but also reviewing the engagement of civil society in that process. One of the participants in that meeting challenged all of us who were there and said, there is a narrative we've been reading and seeing on TV about Africa is on the rise. And she challenged us and said, is Africa on the rise for who? Is it on the rise for all of us sitting around here today? Is it on the rise for the men, women, boys, and girls around Africa? And particularly, she went on to say, we have to look at this narrative from a perspective of who is driving this rising of Africa. Is Africa owning the process of the development of Africa? Or are there external forces that are driving our growth? And what is the interest of those external forces? Is that interest our own empowerment? Is that interest the advancement of ourselves or the reduction of poverty in Africa? Or is the interest of those drivers of change in Africa to make their own countries benefit from the multitude of resources that Africa is endowed with? We all know that Africa, over the last few years, has begun to discover natural resources, with Ghana having found huge multitudes of oil reserves. Nigeria continues to expand in its oil production. Zimbabwe recently, we know, has become one of the 10th countries around the world with the greatest amount of deposits of diamonds. But what is all this doing to our economies, but more importantly, to empowerment of women? As I reflected on this discussion we had over the weekend, I was forced to revisit some of the work I've been doing in UN Women. And I started to rethink of some of the many women across Africa that we've been working with. And I reflected on some of those, and let me share with some of those examples with you. And I want you to also put these women in the context of the discussions we are going to have on the post-2015 development agenda, but also on the Africa's development agenda, Africa 2063. Is Africa rising for the more than 450,000 women in the Great Lakes region who engage in formal cross-border trade as a way of survival, but also of creating employment for themselves and their children and their families? I want us to reflect, is Africa rising for the more than 1,000 survivors of violence against women and girls in the Gao region of Mali, where rape, sexual violence, forced marriage have been used as weapon of war, and where we have begun to see the devastating effects of these acts of violence? For the more than 450 women, dairy farmers and milk producers in Burkina Faso who are struggling to make a living and to survive and to feed their families from producing milk and producing milk products. As this whole process we are discussing today, the post-2015 development agenda and the Africa 2063, taken into account the many thousands exploited domestic workers, but also female migrant domestic workers from Africa who are having to leave their own families, leave their own countries to go and work abroad, and sometimes in very difficult circumstances. Some of the institutions that I've been working with across Africa are providing shelter and services to some of these women. Is the development discourse we are engaging today taking into account some of the challenges that these women face, but more importantly, the factors driving these women to go across borders to look for jobs as domestic workers? We have to really begin to interrogate some of those issues. We all know that more than 70% of agricultural producers in Africa are women. So food security is in the hands of women. And we all know that as Africa is developing its own transformative development agenda, they are saying agriculture is the mainstay for Africa's economic growth. But to what extent are the processes engaging this 70% of the population of Africa, the women, who are doing most of the agricultural production? But more importantly, all of the money that is coming into agriculture sector, how is it benefiting or changing the lives of the women who are engaging in agriculture? I could go on and on and on with so many examples, but I know you all know them because you all live them or you all have all experienced them one way or another in your lives. But I'm now going to end by asking all of you, because you are the leaders and you are the ones that are driving change in your own countries, to say, as we move forward in this process, we really need to sit back, reflect, and think, and ensure that we bring substantive inputs into the discourse. It's no longer the time for us to just play slogans and chant slogans, or just play and just sing women's empowerment without bringing what are the key issues around women's empowerment we are bringing on the table. So I really want to appreciate the technical support that the ECA provides to all of us in terms of the statistics, in terms of the tools for mainstreaming, and in terms of the evidence that can make our arguments make sense to the financing, to the planners, finance ministers, or the people who are shaping the development discourse of the country. Therefore, I really want you to take advantage of this meeting, and also to take advantage of your role as advisor to the ECA on what it is it can continue to do to build our capacity technically to bring the key issues to the table, so that we don't continue to be seen as just making noise, but we contribute meaningfully. We have the CSW upcoming in March 2014, and the CSW again is going to focus on the very same theme that we are discussing today. Again, I urge you, as you deliberate in the next 3 days, let's also strategize on how we will use that opportune time where our member states will sit together to chant the process forward. Again, I urge you to look at some of the drawbacks or the things that are drawing us backwards. Particularly, we are beginning to see, as we saw from the ICPD conference that just ended, that there are some elements of us going backwards on some of the human rights instruments that we have agreed in Africa, which is almost taking away a lot of the gains around women's reproductive rights and health. Again, I want you, and I want to seize the opportunity to request you to engage around those substantive issues and how we strategize at country level, regional level, but more importantly, bring it to the global arena. I would like to wish you a successful meeting, and once again, I thank you, ECA, for engaging UN Women in this process.